everybody. Welcome to the Daily Dose. This week, we are talking about all the things that threaten to break us down or sometimes do. They beat us up in life. The things that pull us away from God or from other people. The things that we just can't ignore because they've left us hurt or angry or sad. And we're looking at these things not to try and somehow avoid them or pretend they don't exist. Things like sadness and shame or fear, they're normal because we're human. But we're talking about them this week because those things, they don't have to define you. They don't have to be the end of your story. God doesn't desire for you to stay in a rut that hurts your self-esteem or fractures your family. We want you to know and to believe that God is actually working overtime to make you whole. So this week we're asking, what does it mean to be made whole? And today I want to talk specifically about bitterness. How do we heal when we feel bitter about something that's happened in our life, or maybe that's happened to someone else but seems to directly affect our life? I, for example, can remember getting a job, or applying for a job that I didn't get. And in my human nature, I felt bitter toward the person who did get the job. What did they do? What quality did they possess that made them better suited for a job I worked really hard at? Maybe you've experienced bitterness in something really personal. Bitterness about someone else getting pregnant when you desperately wanted to. Bitterness about the brokenness or hurt in your family that you've had to work through as you figure out how to be married, hoping not to repeat some of those patterns that you grew up with. I think all of us have experienced bitterness at some point in our lives. And for a minute, I want you to also think with me about the bitterness that we experience when we eat or drink something. For example, I know that you health nuts out there would have me believing that a drink of apple cider vinegar each day is really good for me. But what happens when I take a drink of this? Well, my face gets all scrunched up as I taste that bitter taste in my mouth, on my tongue. Or I can remember the first time I drank coffee. I remember that bitterness staying in my mouth for what felt like way too long. With bitter foods like Brussels sprouts or broccoli, there is a good reason that I roast them with a lot of garlic and then drench them in soy sauce. That bitter taste on its own gives us a visceral physical response. And I think with experiences that leave us feeling bitter, it's not all that different. The feeling we have is tangible. When I'm bitter, it weighs heavy on my heart. It's pervasive. It makes my forehead wrinkle as I worry about the bitterness that I experience, and I work up stories in my mind about the things I somehow don't deserve to experience. And actually, today I want to read for you. There's actually a really beautiful story in the Bible that paints a picture of someone who experienced bitterness and with the help of God and with other people, moved to a place of wholeness. And this story is about two women, Ruth and Naomi. And if you read the book of Ruth, you'll hear about Naomi, who lived during a famine. And she was married to a man named Elimelech, which is really fun to say. And we learn that they live in a place called Moab. And at some point, Naomi's husband, he dies, leaving her with two sons. But then we learn both of her sons, they marry women from another community. And that sounds great and hopeful after the tragedy of losing her husband. But sadly, both of Naomi's sons also die. This would, of course, be devastating for anyone, but in the ancient world, it was especially hard for a woman to be left with no sons to care for her, no husband. And that's where we learn more about one of Naomi's daughters-in-law named Ruth. Naomi, she tries to have her daughter-in-laws leave to go find lives for themselves. We hear, "Return home, my daughters. I am too old to have another husband. Even though I thought there was hope for me, even if I had a husband tonight and then gave birth to sons, would you wait until they grew up? Would you remain unmarried for them? No, my daughters, it is more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord's hand has turned against me." We can hear in these short verses alone that Naomi is truly experiencing a sense of bitterness. Not even just because she uses that word, we can sense it in the way she talks. And later in this chapter, we hear from Ruth, one of her daughter-in-laws, who insists on staying with Naomi and on traveling with her. "Don't urge me to leave you," she says, "or turn back from you. Where I go, you will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God." It's really beautiful. It's a beautiful example of someone who shows up in another person's life. But it wasn't that easy for Naomi to shake this feeling of bitterness. When they get to Bethlehem, when they're traveling, Naomi insists that the people call her Mara rather than Naomi, because Mara means bitter. She says, I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. This feeling of bitterness, it's really hard for her to shake. And Naomi felt like it was God's doing, that she was experiencing this. Again, it's a really normal human thing to feel. And the book of Ruth, it's a short book of the Bible. It's easy to read. You can pick it up. And you will find as you read it that Ruth and Naomi's relationship, it grows. Naomi refers to her as a daughter, and Ruth patiently and faithfully loves her. And eventually we see that Naomi's bitterness, it starts to melt away over time. Naomi knows it's unlikely that she will get married again, but she wants Ruth to have that second chance. Because again, in that day, the land, the inheritance, her livelihood, they were all connected. So by the end of the story, we hear that Ruth, she gets married to a man named Boaz, and they have a son. And we read about Naomi, the widow, who also outlived her children. She's now helping care for a new baby in this beautiful blended family that welcomed her. See, bitterness, it's a real feeling. It's something that each of us either have experienced or will, but it doesn't have to define us. That bitter taste, if you want to go back to that image, that taste, it doesn't have to stay on our tongues, keeping our eyebrows wrinkled forever. What would it look like for you to identify a place where you feel bitter, for you to name the lies that bitterness is causing you to speak about yourself or others, and to let it melt away, leading to a place where you can experience peace and joy, where you can feel whole again? As we hear in the book of Ephesians, chapter 4, get rid of all bitterness, rage, and anger, bawling and slander, along with every form of malice. Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, just as Christ forgave you. Thanks so much for watching the Daily Dose today. We would love for you to share it on Facebook, to share the link with someone else on YouTube, and be sure to come back for another Daily Dose tomorrow. Have a good day.